Lofi Poli Sci coming at you. Michael Pickering here, talking about not our normal famous question, no, but rather a future famous person, perhaps. Yes, indeed. Joining us for the show today, making her return after a year and a half, the amazing Shay Meredith, a 3L JD candidate from the University of Illinois College of Law, who is planning to work as a public defender in the Chicago area after she passes the bar this coming year. And one of the best students I've ever had. Welcome back to the show, Shay. How are we doing?
Well, thank you so much. I'm doing really well. I'm happy to be back. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. It's lovely. The weather, it's actually starting to feel like fall or winter, depending on your take on how cold is cold, but it is beautiful outside in New Orleans. How's the weather up there out in Chicago area?
It's starting to get pretty cold. It's been getting cold for the last couple of weeks, making me really miss the New Orleans weather. But it's a nice change, and it's nice to have like an actual full fall season. So
There you go. Now you know you officially have turned old, Shay, since you're talking about the weather with me. That's right. No, but how's law school going? You're a 3L. For those of you people out there who don't know, law school, it's in three different year categories. It's 1L is first year, 2L second year, 3L is your third year. And the last time I talked to you, Shay, you were actually the first person to ever come on the show. And you were the first guest, and you were in your second semester of 1L. And
yes.
now you're in your first semester of 3L, your final year. How has this been like?
It's been a really wild ride. Yeah, last time I was on, so in 1L, you don't get to pick your classes. You kind of just have to take all of the basic law courses, which, to be honest, I found incredibly boring. And so after that first year, I was kind of like, I guess I'm going to stick it out, going to my second year. And it was much better when I got to pick classes that I really enjoyed. And then, this year they actually call 3L 3LOL because it's most of the time people don't really do a whole lot. And I am definitely falling into that category. I'm only taking 12 credit hours, just taking lots of classes that I really enjoy. And, it's been a lot. It's steadily getting better, but I'm also ready to be done. So
3LOL. That's funny. That's funny. Is that a College of Law, University of Illinois kind of thing, or is that like widespread nationwide? I don't know a whole lot about law school trends.
I think it is a law school wide thing. To be honest, I don't really know much about other law schools. Didn't really know any lawyers or people in law school before I went. So I do feel a little insulated with my experience, but I do think it's a pretty common trend.
That's interesting. Normally, whenever I talk to people, like former students, or students that are thinking about going to law school, a lot of them, they very much either like have lawyers in their family, or they know lawyers, or like they kind of already have like a leg into it. It's very rare to meet someone of my students who are like, yeah, I want to be a lawyer. And it's like, why? And they're like, oh, I don't know. It's just kind of what I want to do. It's like, really, you want to go to law school, just on a whim? Interesting. Would you say law school is easy, medium, hard, what you expected? Like, what is it now that you're almost done with it? Like, how do you think about it compared to before you started?
Oh, that's it, this is such a common refrain in the legal field too. And anytime I talk about being a law student or going into the legal field, it depends is like the phrase everyone uses. But it definitely, when I thought about law school before, it was sort of this really nebulous concept. I didn't really know what I was getting into. And I kind of went into the whole situation thinking I'm going to struggle a lot. And I did my first year kind of getting my bearings, but I've definitely found my footing. And I think a lot of people, once they sort of figure out what they want to do in the law, they, by their 2L year, they feel a little bit more comfortable with everything. And as far as like comparative difficulty, my brother is a physics PhD student, and man, there is no comparison. I have to say, like, law school, is definitely easier than what he's doing. And I imagine easier than most PhD programs. Pretty much anyone who's in law school would agree with me. You know, anyone who comes out of law school and calls themselves a doctor is pretty much asking for a punch in the face.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I could see with the whole physics PhD thing, but something I have come to learn is that not all PhD programs are as difficult as you might think. And it's not even necessarily by field. Um, because even in the same field, like I know other people who did PhDs in other universities, and I'm not going to name drop, but like there's some universities that you would think it is extremely difficult to get a PhD in. And then you talk to them about, like in political science in general, and you talk to them about what their PhD comprehensive exams were like. So I mean, you have to take the bar before you become a lawyer, right?
Right.
So like in the PhD process, you have to take PhD comprehensive exams, and then you also have to write a dissertation and defend it. But like the PhD comps, that's the exams, it's basically like you get asked a few questions about your field, and you have like either 1 day or 2 day, but you have several hours of testing where you write, and it's an assessment of how much you've absorbed about the literature. And we, for our PhD comps, we have to go off of memory. And so like we have to remember authors, we have to remember the years that they published, we have to remember the theories, like everything has to be off of memory. And so basically you're writing like literature reviews and analytical essays that are up to 20 pages, just completely off of memory. And it's for hours and hours and hours. And I talked to some other people and they're like, oh no, we got to bring like cheat sheets, and we got to bring list of authors and all their theories. And I was like, you mean to tell me your PhD comprehensive exams were open fucking book? I was like, get the fuck out of here. I was like, or some people's PhD comprehensive exams aren't even exams. They just write papers, which is also like, it's also like a take-home exam. I was like, my goodness, I wish. So your brother's being in physics, I could see like high-level physics being difficult, but not all PhDs are necessarily as difficult to get, at least at the very end of it. But like, how difficult is the bar going to be? I hear different things about that. What's your tell?
Man, well, just we don't have our cameras on, but my eyes when you said that you had to write like 20 pages with no outlines or no notes or anything, that's in law that is unthinkable, to be honest with you. Like that level of difficulty is not present in our exams. I mean, sometimes we'll have closed book exams, but the professors sort of tailor the exams to, usually you won't have to cite specific laws or statutes if they're totally closed book. So it's definitely comparatively easier, I would say. But as far as the bar goes, the bar is difficult in the sense that it's so like broad based. And in the state of Illinois, we take the uniform bar exam. So that's a bar exam that the results are applicable. The test is the same across a bunch of states who have adopted the uniform bar exam as their like testing measure. And basically, based on the score that you get on that, you can practice in an increasing number of jurisdictions that have adopted the uniform bar exam. So I think Illinois, I'm pretty sure, is like middle of the pack as far as what score you have to get. But like, for example, I think New York has one of the highest score requirements. So a lot of the time when people end up passing the bar, they'll post on LinkedIn or tell their employer, I'm now licensed to practice in all uniform bar exam jurisdictions. So, my hope is that when I take it, I'll be able to get high enough scores so that, if I want to move out of Illinois, I can go and practice in other places. But the bar exam is, the difficult part about it, in my opinion, is it's so broad-based and you have to know everything about everything, like trusts and estates, which is something I personally know nothing about. You have to know things about criminal procedure, which is, kind of in my wheelhouse. So I feel okay about that. And then you have to know things about like business associations and taxation. Obviously it's usually pretty basic things about that, but it's just so many different fields. And for me, anything to do with like money management or like the business side of law is just, I immediately kind of fall asleep. So that's could be a difficult one. But we take a lot of law students will take like 8-week prep courses, and usually those set you up pretty well. So I'm hoping for the best, but I have like 9 months to prep now, so I'm just waiting out the inevitable shit show that's going to be next summer.
Is it open book, or is it on a computer? Is it on paper? Like, what's the format?
It is totally closed book, so that part is definitely a little bit reminiscent of what you were talking about with your comprehensive exams. It is totally closed book, but it's all on the computer. I think they have some sort of like secure program that they allow people to take the exam. And I think it's split into 2 days, at least it was this past year, for my friends who graduated last year and just took it this past summer. And from what I heard, the first day is all multiple choice, and then the second day is all like essays. So you get all of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I've known, so people I went to college with, I know a couple people and one of my former roommates who took the bar and passed. And I think one of them, again, I'm not going to drop any names, not that they listen to this, but it took them, I think, twice to pass it. And it's so funny because one of their favorite movies in undergrad was My Cousin Vinny, and
Yes.
Joe Pesci, like, took him 6 times to pass the bar exam in the movie, and it kind of made me chuckle when my friend told me it took him twice. I was like, go you, trying to be all My Cousin Vinny in it. But yeah, that's interesting. Like, I had known that Louisiana has the different system, but I wasn't sure how it worked out as far as a uniform bar exam for the rest of the country, and if you could just openly practice in all 49 states, or like you said, now there are requirements. You have to make a certain score on a bar in order to practice in different states. If you score high enough, you can practice in all of them, but if you don't, you can only practice in some of them. I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean that with Louisiana. So Louisiana has civil law, and the rest of the country uses common law. Common law, it's all kind of based on like court decisions and stare decisis. So whatever a court decides, the courts below it kind of have to follow that, and it's just like a lot of precedent sort of setting and building upon each other over the last, I guess, 250 years that this country's been in existence. But in Louisiana, it's all about like codes, from what I gather. I don't know too much about Louisiana's legal system. I've tried to look into it just in case, I want to.
No, you're right. It's all civil. Well, portions of it are all civil and code law. It started to change, and precedent does matter now as well. But a good portion, especially in family law, it has to do with, it's based on like the Napoleonic Code and code law in that instance. But it's not in all aspects of Louisiana law. But because it is a mixture, yeah, it is quite different. That's why we have to
Yeah.
do the different bar. Or not we, I don't have to take that. Goodness no. It had never crossed my mind to become a lawyer. I was like, I think not.
So interesting, because I definitely have encountered so many people in law school who, and I mean, I was in the same boat where I was sort of between thinking about a poli sci PhD or a history PhD and going to law school. There's a lot of overlap. A lot of people do poli sci in undergrad to sort of shift gears into law school eventually. So I'm surprised. I think you make a great lawyer personally.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I do know quite a few people who are in my classes. And even when I was an undergrad, who do poli sci as kind of their own pre-law program, because not all undergraduate universities have pre-law programs. And so they just do poli sci. But I mean, the truth about it is poli sci is going to help you in a law degree, depending on what type of law you go into, right? Like, I have another friend of mine who is a lawyer, he got his undergraduate degree in economics, and then he went to practice personal injury law. And so I'm like, would personal injury law or like real estate law or like, there's so many different kinds of law that you could practice. Would poli sci really even help you for all of those? Like real estate law, how much would poli sci help you for real estate law? I don't know if that's your field or area, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's sort of, I think a lot of people associate poli sci with like being able to make good arguments, or at least
Ah, okay.
just some sort of, yeah, and like getting a lay of, because a lot of legal systems are, reformed via political processes. And so it kind of informs you on like the history of how, legal systems sort of came to be. I don't know, that's my hypothesis, but I could totally see how econ would help someone with personal injury. I mean, personal injury is all about just trying to pull together a bunch of factors and see how that can get someone like the best outcome in some sort of a case like a car accident or something. I could see how some knowledge of money, I think, yeah, again, this is I'm so I definitely am gonna need that bar course to understand some of these more basic concepts outside of criminal law.
Well then, yeah. Well then, talk to us about what you are going into in law. Like, what kind of law are you going to be practicing? So I already told everyone at your introduction you want to practice and be a public defense attorney or a public defender. So like, what kind of law are you getting into?
Yeah, so I am, generally I'm going into criminal law, and then with public defense work, it's all funded by the government, so it's technically, government public interest work, and kind of what else falls under that would be like prosecution, so state's attorneys, district attorneys, or United States attorneys if you're working in the federal system. But I am planning on sticking with probably just state level things. I don't think I'd end up doing federal public defense work because they, from what I have heard, lose most of their cases. And, that's part of the job, but also I don't necessarily want it to be always part of my job.
Sure,
And
yeah.
yeah, so definitely just criminal law in general and criminal defense. A lot of it is, sort of like constitutionally based. Lots of Fourth Amendment issues, Fifth and Sixth Amendment, and public defense is actually. So there was a Supreme Court case, Gideon v. Wainwright, in the early 1960s, and that kind of established that everyone is entitled to a lawyer in certain types of criminal cases, no matter how much money they make or how little they make. And so, essentially, regardless of their ability to pay for a lawyer. So, shout out Gideon v. Wainwright. That's why I have a career.
Nice, very nice, very nice. So you want to be a public defender. I feel that. That's cool. Help
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of always knew I wanted to do something public interest oriented. My mom was a teacher when I was growing up, kindergarten, and then now she's a school administrator. And, honestly, she really inspired me growing up, just seeing her passion for helping people and, making sure that people would have better outcomes than they otherwise would, without her presence in their life. So I was always pretty inspired by that. And just kind of, I've always been very social justice oriented. I'm sure you can probably remember some of my heated contributions in your classes in undergrad.
Yeah, we
But
won't recap them for people, but yes, I do.
sure. Yeah, so I knew going into law school, public defense wasn't really on my radar at all. I was honestly more thinking civil rights law. And but then I sort of fell in love with public defense. I had my criminal law class in 1L, and then the summer after 1L, I started interning at a local public defender's office, and I loved it. Every single day, I feel like I'm making some kind of a difference, whether it's just something super tiny, just talking to someone and giving them information about their case, for, getting emotions granted, and, making sure people aren't going to be subject to unjust sentences. It feels really good to do the work, and that's why I got into it.
I love that. You getting into it to make a difference and actually making a difference. I mean, that's what it's all about. That's, living the dream. I like that. I like that a lot. And it makes me happy to hear that you're actually doing it. That's fantastic, Shay. Fantastic.
I like to think I make a difference.
Of course. Making a difference in one person's life is a huge difference. All you have to do is ask that person, and they will tell you. We don't change the world by changing 800 or 8 billion people at a time, like all together. We change the world by changing one person at a time. And then they change a person, and they change a person, and they change a person, and then all the dominoes fall, and then kumbaya, the world is so great, isn't it? Yes, yes.
Right.
But let's actually use that as a segue to a greater discussion about how sometimes the world isn't all that great. And
Yes.
it's what you are here to talk to us about today. So Shay, lead us into it. What are we going to talk about?
Yeah, so I'm essentially here today to kind of talk about women in law generally. And, I did a little bit of research just sort of prepping for this. And I am kind of continually shocked by how there still isn't a lot of parity in the legal field as far as, pay and representation among women. And, for people curious, I do identify as a woman. And so that's sort of why I, feel responsible for talking about this. If, Michael's kindly given me this platform to talk about it. So, one source that I found, it was a commission, I believe, created by the American Bar Association, which is the overarching organization that gives people licenses and manages professional conduct in the legal field. So in 2018, their commission found that somewhere between 35 and 40% of all lawyers are women, which is a number that is steadily increasing, which is fantastic. I love to see that. However, in big law, which is that's sort of the generalist term that people in law use to talk about the larger firms where people are making, 200 grand a year right out of law school if they go into this. In big law firms, only about 25% of lawyers in these firms are women. And then as far as law review authors in law schools, so law review, these are like the journals that law schools will keep, and they're student run, obviously with faculty advisors, but only 20% of law review authors are women, which is pretty sad to hear, honestly. I mean, that is, it means 80% are men, 20% are women. It's just, it's such a disappointing factor to hear about, but at the same time, these numbers are improving, which is nice. And actually, I believe my law school is more women and men, or more women than men are enrolled at my law school, which I think is really cool. I love that about my law school. I've had some really amazing and powerful women who were my professors throughout my 3 years here. And they've been really inspiring and fantastic mentors for me. And then another statistic that I found is women only account for about a quarter of all federal and state level judicial positions. So a lot of judges, or all federal judges, are appointed by the president, usually all Article 3 judges. So these are your district court judges, your appeals, your like Seventh Circuit would be, the Chicago, Indiana area. Seventh Circuit or any of the appellate circuit judges are appointed by the president, and of course, Supreme Court justices as well. And on the state level, this statistic is accounting for federal and state level judges, and women are only a quarter of all judges throughout the country, which is pretty wild to me. And a little disappointing, but again, it's a number that is improving, and I'm excited to see where that goes.
Just
And yeah,
screams patriarchy. Like
absolutely.
especially since you think about like the federal appointments. Who appoints federal judges? You said it, right? The president. When was the
Yep.
last time we had a woman president?
Ooh.
Trick
That would be never.
question. Yeah, that would be never. So, I mean, it's ridiculous to see that number is that high. And one that I want to go back to that really kind of upsets me for a different kind of reason, that you said for law review authors that women only account for 20% of law review authors.
Right.
And you said that these journals are run by the institutions, they're run by law schools, right? And for me as an academic, for someone in the field, like that just tells me that institutions are not taking this number seriously. Like they're completely not thinking about gender equality in the review process. And like how could they ignore this number? They're in the legal field. This is what they do. They can't not know that only 20% of law reviewers are authors, because they're the ones who actively make the choice. Like that's mind-boggling to me, Shay. It's really, really mind-boggling.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, I think a lot of educational institutions really pride themselves on, trying to reach diversity parity, whether it's having more people of color in leadership positions or more women as law review authors. And I think a lot of institutions pride themselves on this in some ways to get better funding or to make themselves look better on a national stage. But a lot of the time, it's not really borne out in actual practice. And I think these numbers really show that the progress that they're making doesn't always match up with the progress that they say they're making, if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. Like if you were to say, let's say, like, this is theoretical numbers. So let's say the year before this statistic, that it was 19% of law review authors were women, right?
Mhm.
But then like the next year it jumps up to 20%. Then what is the universities, what do they all say? They're like, oh, we have more women as law authors than ever before.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, that statement is true, but it's 20%. Like I think you're absolutely right. A lot of the talk in academia about increasing diversity, either by race, ethnicity, linguistics, or by gender, a lot of it is lip service, without a doubt. And these numbers definitely show that.
Definitely. And I mean, institutions will try some institutions will try their best to get a little bit more diversity in leadership and in authorship and in their academic pursuits. But it's the legal field actually, to an extent, is starting to potentially turn against itself in this regard. I mean, I'm not sure if you have heard about the U.S. Supreme Court's upcoming docket, but I mean,
Yeah, I think I know where you're going. Yeah, go with it. Tell us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, affirmative action is definitely on the chopping block, and I mean, it's I haven't read into the potential arguments that are coming up enough to really speak on it a lot, but I know a lot of people are very interested to see what happens with diversity on campuses after affirmative action measures are, or potentially if they are outlawed by the U.S. Supreme Court. And so that'll be an interesting development to see how these numbers change after that, whether they're going to go down or if this trend is totally unrelated to affirmative action measures. It's something that we'll definitely have to keep an eye on.
You're right, because like we're saying here with women in law, universities may be tooting that they're increasing, but the numbers are actually showing like it's still not good.
Mhm.
But and these institutions, these are doctors of all kinds of fields. These are lawyers who run these institutions. Like these are not stupid people. They're not ignorant people. They know these numbers.
Right.
They are making these choices. They make enrollment procedures. And if affirmative action disappears, even while it was here, they're obviously not doing a good job. So if
Right.
affirmative action disappears, then they have even less incentive to do the shitty job that they were doing before. Like
Right.
it's extremely concerning. Oh.
So
Come on.
I
What else you got for us to make us hate the world? Well, we had some technical difficulties right there. It seems like we were getting too hot and the world broke, but we're going to fix the world right now, aren't we, Shay? How are we going to fix the world? We need to know what's broken before we can fix it. So hit us with some more statistics. What you got for us?
Yeah, sure thing. So, as obviously I mentioned earlier, I'm going into public defense and more, broadly government public interest work. And I found this article. It's titled "Women Helped Shape Public Defense," and so it turns out, and I mean, again, these are statistics I didn't know about, even as someone who's going into this. 76% of elected prosecutors are men, and within that, well, of all elected prosecutors, 95% are white. So, this does not match up, as is probably pretty obvious, with the general population and population demographics. And it's really unfortunate, but that some may say maybe that's the nature of prosecution. And it's actually really interesting, from where I was looking, just kind of general research I was doing. It seems like about half and half of public defenders are men and women. And in some jurisdictions, it's actually more women than men, which is, kind of unfortunate in a way. I mean, I love going into a field that has that sort of parity between men and women, but it's unfortunate because the vast majority of the time, prosecutors are paid more than public defenders. Actually, in the state of Illinois, there's now a law, this has just been within the past couple of years, where the head public defender has to be paid at least 90% of what the head prosecutor in a given jurisdiction is paid. So there isn't a law about them being paid equally. And actually before that, the pay disparity was even worse. Before, they said that public defenders have to make at least 90% of what the prosecutor makes in that jurisdiction.
That has a really fucked up effect.
Yeah.
That incentivizes the best lawyers to want to be prosecutors because they'll make more money.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean,
it gives like a bias. It gives a bias towards, that's disturbing, besides the fact that they should be paid equal. But prosecutors and public defenders, though, they're both government employees. They're both paid by the same people, aren't they? Or am I wrong?
No, you're totally correct. Yeah. And I mean, it definitely has that effect of drawing people to prosecution. It's definitely going to be more of a sure thing as far as pay in a lot of places. I believe, and I'm not totally sure about this, but I believe that on average in the Chicago area, public defenders and prosecutors are paid about the same. And in some instances, public defenders are actually paid a little bit more, which I think is really interesting. And that's a really interesting experiment. I definitely will have to do a little bit more research into exactly why that is. But, it's sort of, I mean, I've even been told by public defenders that I should consider going into prosecution and becoming a state's attorney instead. And that's because, prosecutors in the United States generally have so much power. They have very wide discretion on what they can charge. They can prioritize certain charges and, go a little bit lighter on certain other charges. And it's pretty amazing to see the differences in prosecutorial priorities across counties, even within Illinois. Like, I know that in my county, there is a really heavy prioritization of gun crimes, and the bail settings for people who are accused of committing gun violence in Champaign County is typically going to be really, really, really high. And that's sort of started in the last couple of years just because gun violence has become a really big problem here. But at the same time, as I think a lot of people have maybe heard, Illinois is eliminating cash bail starting in January of 2023. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to affect gun violence in Champaign County, I have a suspicion that it will not affect it at all because,
Ooh.
yeah, well, because I think that having higher bail, it, from what I've seen, it hasn't really affected gun violence at all. And I mean, all it does is keep people who are unable to pay that bail in jail, but plenty of people who are able to pay it are able to get out, which, in my opinion, and this is pretty common among public defense, or, as a future public defender, I'm not one yet, but it's a pretty common sentiment that, bail sort of enhances just the income disparities between people. It really sort of enhances class disparities. And because cash bail doesn't really, a lot of the time, doesn't have a lot of bearing on the individual person. And, it's more about just what sort of crime they're alleged to have committed. But, that's sort of a side tangent. But yeah, so that'll be really interesting to see how that affects a lot of things in Illinois in the next couple of years. But yeah, so prosecutors in the United States generally have a lot of power, and they can really affect change in the criminal legal system. And it's not that there certainly isn't as much power in that with public defenders, but for me, I like public defense because of the sort of harm reduction aspect of it. And I personally don't think I could ever be a prosecutor, but I've had public defenders encourage me to do that because it's a little bit more of a stable situation, and more power. But yeah.
Let me ask you, you said 76% of elected prosecutors are men. What's the percentage? I think you said it again, but I'm just curious again, the percentage for public defenders for women and men.
Yeah, so from what I could see, it seems to be about 50-50. And at least in Illinois, most public defenders are not elected. I actually don't think any are. They're usually appointed by the county board. So, they have to be, most of the time they have to have prior public defense experience, but they're not elected, which I think is sort of interesting, in that, you have to wonder, why is it that an elected position tends to have more men and a non-elected position seems to have, a little bit more parity? Yeah, so it's just interesting.
Oh, patriarchy, what?
You said it.
You're right. I'll say it all the day long. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it's not going to disappear unless we keep saying it. Like,
Yeah.
if people don't say it, then it's an invisible thing that exists. But if we do say it, then people start to realize that it does exist, and then we can actually do something about it.
For sure.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
all of these statistics that you've been saying are just horrendous,
Yeah, it's pretty disheartening, I mean, and another aspect to that too is, public defense is sort of seen as like a helping career. And I mean, prosecution also to an extent, but I think public defense is a lot more seen as it's kind of like the comparison that I would make it. And, this sort of explains why it's women dominated in a lot of areas. It's like with teaching, that's also a traditionally women dominated career path. And it also is one of those career paths that is paid very low, with, when compared to the amount of work that goes into it. And I think, again, this ties in with patriarchy and sort of public's perception of who is supposed to be in these roles. And I think, with prosecution, a lot of the time it's seen as a pretty high power position to hold. If you're a county prosecutor, I mean, you are running the criminal justice system in a given county. And so I think, that can kind of explain a little bit why it's so much more male dominated on the prosecution side. And, it's also unfortunate, like I said, 95% of elected prosecutors are also white, which just does not really make sense. I mean, well, there is still a lot of systemic racism. That's a big problem. And especially in a field that's, the legal field is very traditional in a lot of ways, in very bad ways. And there's, you said, like, right at the beginning, it's sort of rare to meet people who don't really have a background with, with family in the legal field, or, friends or some connections. And that's a huge, huge barrier to people entering the legal field. And, obviously, people of color have been prevented from entering the legal field in a lot of situations, not the least of which because it is such an expensive field to get into. I mean, just paying for taking the bar is over $1,000.
Damn, what for?
Yeah.
It's a test.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, the same company that runs the LSAT, the law school admissions test, and they have a monopoly on it. And so they're able to charge kind of whatever they want. And, it keeps the legal field in a sort of, it keeps it in like a boys club situation, because, these barriers, I mean, there's, I think a lot of people know the disparity, the wealth gap between white people and people of color, especially Black people in the United States, where there is just so much more accumulated wealth with white people in the US than there is with Black people and with other people of color. And how in the hell are people supposed to afford a $2,000 bar prep course, a $1,000+ test, and then potentially also, if you have to work prior to taking the bar exam because you don't have the money to just sit and study all day, then that's going to lower your chances of being able to pass the exam. And then you just have to pay all over again to take it. And so it's such a huge barrier. And yeah, so I'm a big advocate of something called diploma privilege. I think the bar exam sort of exists as just another barrier that keeps, historically marginalized groups from entering the legal field and from making these statistics and all these numbers that I've listed and been talking about improve and actually reach some sort of parity. And, so diploma privilege, essentially just you go through law school, you graduate from law school, you become a lawyer. And actually the state of Wisconsin already has this. So if you graduate from a Wisconsin law school, you are a licensed attorney. There may be some other smaller, ethics exams that you have to take just to get those licenses, but, you don't have to take the bar exam. You don't have to pay $2,500 for a bar prep exam. You don't have to pay, or for a bar prep course, and then you don't have to pay $1,000+ for an exam. And I mean, when you're taking the bar exam, not everyone can afford to take these bar prep courses. And, on top of that, even if you can afford to take it, if you have to work through that studying period because you can't afford to just not work for 3 months, then that lowers your chances of being able to pass the bar exam when you do take it. And so then you have to just take it all over again and spend, $1,500+ paying for that exam again. And it's this spiral, this cycle of keeping people out of the legal field that really would make it so much of a better place. And that kind of segues into just my own personal experiences as a woman in the legal fields. It honestly was such a huge culture shock coming to law school. I didn't really know any lawyers before I came here. I knew I wanted to, continue my education, and I thought this was a good way to do that. And at Tulane, I was involved in some social justice organizations, and everyone was very oriented in that way. And then coming to law school, it is still in a lot of ways a very traditional field. There's a lot of expectations about how women are supposed to look, dress, act in the courtroom that they kind of warn you about in trial advocacy courses and just talking with judges. And it's, even though nominally we're supposed to be moving forward and accepting a broad base of people into the field and into the courtroom, they've done studies about how juries perceive female lawyers, and juries tend to have a more favorable view of like women lawyers who wear skirts than they do of women lawyers who wear pants, which is just crazy. I mean,
That's beyond that. That's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, and I mean, this is, I can't even speak to the sort of discrimination that, women of color have to experience in courtrooms as well. I mean, there's such a long way to go. And it's kind of just appalling that in a field where, people expect lawyers to be sort of at the forefront of changing laws, and a lot of the time law will change the culture. If you legalize certain behaviors, certain outcomes, it changes the culture and it allows people to be more free. But this is just an area of the legal field that really it's so far behind, and it's something has to change. But yeah, it's the same in a lot of fields, but particularly, in my experience working and being in a courtroom, there's just these really odd expectations about how women are supposed to act too. We can't be as aggressive as like our male counterparts. And a lot of the advice that male lawyers will give to female attorneys is just not applicable. Like, we can't go really hard on witnesses. We have to play more of a demure role in a lot, or we don't have to, but there's this expectation. And there's also this notion too of like, if you go against the grain, all it's going to do is hurt your client. And so that holds a lot of people back, and it puts a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and responsibility on female attorneys who would love otherwise to break the molds. Like I myself, I have, quite a few piercings, and I like to color my hair crazy colors sometimes, but I can't anymore with this, because I still feel that pressure, and I feel that guilt. If I were to do it, would that affect my client negatively? And it's crazy. We should be long past this, but we're not.
That sadly makes me think that not everyone who becomes a lawyer and who becomes a judge wants to move forward. It's as simple as that. Some people enter the field not because they want to change things, but because they want to keep them the same.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think when you look at the statistics that you provided, predominantly white people, predominantly men, like if a patriarchy and a racially based white patriarchy is the reason for holding the country back, and that still greatly exists within the legal profession, that's an issue. And it is an issue that's holding it back, and like we once again said, a lot of academic institutions give lip service about how they want to move forward and diversity and stuff, but you also have to wonder how many government institutions are giving that same lip service, but at the same time are headed by people who have no intention of trying to move forward at all.
Absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head. I would love to be in the halls of, all of these institutions when they're having these conversations. I'd love to know who's being genuine and who's not, but we'll never know. I mean, yeah.
Well, I do want to ask you, because like what you said is appalling, right? The fact that women have to act in a very particular way in court in comparison to men, or, or about the pay disparities or the offices disparities. Overall, though, have you seen that, are things getting better nationwide, or are things getting better in some sectors of the legal field, or are things getting better just in some geographic locations? Like what's your take about improvement moving forward? How is it, like I said, it's a lot of different ways you can look at it. Do you see improvement everywhere or just in some places?
That's a difficult question, because I think in my field, there does tend to be more of a progressive bent in, public defense in particular, but in government work, just because, you know, if you're going to put yourself through law school and go into student debt and still choose to go into a government position, you know, there are certain, typically that takes, you're going to usually find more progressive folks in these fields. And so there is more of a push among people taking the pay cut to push the boundaries a little bit. I mean, I've definitely seen female attorneys with, you know, different colored hair. Like I've seen pink and purple hair, which I think is just super cool. And actually, when I first started interning at the public defender's office, I used to flip my septum ring up because I was worried about how I would be perceived. And then one day I went through the security area and I had it flipped down. And one of the security guards was like, "Oh, I didn't know you had that." And I was like, "Oh, you know, shit," like flipped it back up. And he's like, "You know, nobody cares, right?" I was like, What do you mean nobody cares? Like, I have been told for so long that if you have facial piercings of any kind, like, you know, you're going to be seen as you're just not going to be taken very seriously. And, you know, I went in and I talked to a couple of the other public defenders and they were like, "Yeah, we don't care. The judges don't really care. Clients especially don't really care as long as you're doing a good job." And so in my experience in the criminal side of things, it's definitely going in a better direction. And, you know, I've heard stories about even in big law, it's definitely getting better. They're, you know, allowing a little bit more diversity of expression. And especially I've heard with, you know, diversity of gender expression too, there's a lot more acceptance of trans people in more fields and of people who don't really stick with the gender binary. And I think that's great. But obviously, you know, with the statistics I've shown, we have a long way to go for sure.
Definitely, it is good news, and you are right. You know, we do still have a long way to go, but that's also why it's important. So like all these statistics we have for these recent years, we also need to continue compiling these statistics in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now. Like we need to compare to see over time, are we really getting better, or are we only getting better in some places or not? Like I have to wonder, are things only getting better on the criminal side of things in the Chicago area? Is that true of like the rural Illinois area? Is it true of like Oklahoma area, urban versus rural? Like there's a lot of different questions that, you know, I think we don't necessarily have the data to answer. Like even that you were talking about earlier, you had to get more of a sense of things because some of the data just don't exist. And I think partially for those individuals trying to hold back moving forward, it is an advantage for them that the data don't exist. Because if the data did exist and they tell the story, well, then people would be outed as trying to, you know, reinforce the patriarchy, for instance. But I do have one last question to send us out on. And you know, Shay, I met you almost 5 years ago, you know, in an intro American government class. And
Yeah.
it's been quite some time. And we've taken quite a journey. And now you're in 3L, you're in your last year of law school. And the people who are most directly going to be listening to this are you 5 years ago. You know, they're people, my students, who are very much thinking about what their next step is. And I want to ask you if you maybe have anything to say to the women out there who are thinking about going to law school, or just anyone, you know, about their next step after graduation. Um, Go ahead, take it away.
Yeah. Do it. Just, I mean, do it. You know, I think at least at my law school, there's a lot of opportunities for scholarships. And so, I mean, if you can find, and there's plenty of law schools out there that if you do well enough in undergrad, you can get a good scholarship and you can make it happen. And I think having a JD really opens up a lot of doors. And so I would say anyone who's, you know, curious about it, I think, you know, especially at Tulane, there's, you know, some resources in the pre-law office, but I think also just if you have a passion for wanting to help people and, you know, you want to continue going to school and you want to continue somewhat sort of a poli-sci path. I mean, I think a lot more people would do well in law school than they think. You know, I think a lot of people are kept out based on finances or thinking that it's going to be way too difficult. But I think more people should consider law school. I really do. I think people scare, younger people about it. And I'm one of the younger people at my law school because I went straight through. And I also would encourage, just based on talking to my colleagues who took some time off between, if you can take some time off between, maybe be a paralegal, see if that's for you. Or maybe don't do anything legal related. Just, go and do something that sounds fun and that you might be interested in, see if you like it. And then if you don't, then law school will always be there. There's no real rush. Most law schools have plenty of people there who didn't go straight through. In fact, a lot of the top law schools prefer people who have 2 years of working experience now. So, no rush, but also I think I've enjoyed it so far, and I feel really fortunate to have had this experience.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You heard it. You heard it straight from Shay, people. Just do it. Just go to law school. Just apply now. Go out there and change the world. Make it a better place. Yes, indeed.
Just do it.
Yes. Shay, truly, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I've wanted you back on since the last time you were on. So you know what? Don't make us wait so long next time. In fact, let's put it on the books that after you're done with law school, you have to come back next summer. Post bar exam, huh? How about that?
I'd love to. I'm always happy to catch up with you and happy to, spread the message to the youth.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. All right, Shay, thank you again. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
And that's a brief snapshot of what's going on in the U.S. legal system today. Do you have questions for Shay Meredith, our guest? Write into the show. We'll get them on to her. And it's not a cliche or a catchphrase. It's a lifestyle. Always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Meredith and Pickering, signing off.